Chris, we just saw the mayoral debate, 9 candidates here at the Global Center. A lot of discussion. If you were one of the 8 who are running against Mayor Jackson, they talked a lot about leadership, which sort of seemed to be their code word for it's time for a change in leadership.
Right, and sometimes they said straight out, it's time for a change in leadership. Zach Reed was very, very effective in delivering that message. This is 8 people running against 1. I mean, this is really, you think of a debate as 9 people, but it's not. It's 8 people running against Frank Jackson. I thought it was interesting in the beginning when Zach Reed in his opening statement said, this is not about Frank Jackson. Frank Jackson's done a good job. And then he read off a report card where he gave him an F on every category.
I thought that was very hard to figure. I mean, I don't know, maybe he got an A for effort. I couldn't figure out what the good grade was supposed to be, that he's done a good job.
But it was very, I mean, as soon as he said it, he made it clear, this is very much about Frank Jackson. And is 12 years enough? Is it time for a change? 8 people on the stage clearly think it is.
And then, of course, Mayor Jackson's comeback throughout was experience, and then very much delivered very strongly at the end, where he had the advantage of being the last one to go, plus again, sort of the 1 against 8, saying, I live this every day.
I live this every day, and he is running on his record. He's not somebody that's running away from his record. He's talking about the school transformation plan. He didn't talk about the consent decree, which was an avenue of attack for several of his opponents, saying it's not effectively being carried out. He never addressed that. But he talked about economic development. He talked about community benefits, the agreements he's built to make sure jobs go to city residents. He feels very strongly, or he's showing very strongly, that he thinks his record is worth promoting.
Did you expect to hear more from the mayor today about his vision for the second term, or do you think he's holding that back to wait till after September 12th to really talk about what he'd like to do in a 4th term?
I think one of the most striking elements of his decision to seek a 4th term is the complete lack of a discussion about anything new in that term. He basically says, I'm running to carry the existing programs forward. He wants to continue the police consent decree. He has youth violence programs he wants to carry out, the school transformation plan, but lacking, completely lacking in what the next step is, which is what the opponents are seizing upon. None of them have articulated a very clear vision for that either.
Yeah, I thought that it was very diffuse, if you will, and maybe it was a matter of the format. Obviously, when you have 9 people on the stage, nobody gets too much time to develop any idea. But there was this kind of, here's this, I have this idea about adult literacy, which I thought was kind of interesting to throw out, but without any exasperation about what exactly that means, or this about public safety. Because I think the candidate, they're all looking for maybe what their vision is other than a new mayor. And
there were a few specifics. Look, if you read Eric Brewer's Facebook page, you think he's a crazy person. In this format, he comes across very, very well, and he had an effective message. He believes that the city needs a public hospital and that there's a tax that he could assess that would pay for it, and spoke several times about that's a serious need. A clear, solid non-abstraction that he put on the table. Brandon Krastowski very strongly, because this is his background, believes in job training centers, that as mayor you would see job training centers develop in Cleveland because he believes that's the biggest need. Others talked about jobs, but not as specifically as Brandon did.
Both Brandon Krastowski and Tony Manalone, first-time candidates, younger, one's 37, one's 32. They both mentioned their ages. I thought that was interesting. Took frequent shots at elected officials, people who've been career politicians. Do you think that is what you expect to hear a lot from them around that in the last 2 weeks in terms of trying to say, hey, at least if you're going to have a guy going in for his 4th term, you need a fresh voice and a fresh face?
Well, yeah, I do. And I think Matalone specifically called out Jeff Johnson, Zach Reed, and Frank Jackson by name as he was talking about their ineffectiveness and their failures. And I think you're exactly right. He even used some of their answers to turn that message. Jeff Johnson talked about how he just put in legislation dealing with lead paint, and Matalone said, you've been a councilman for 8 years, and you're just doing that now. I think the voters need to pay attention to all this stuff that's happening in an election year. They didn't deliver. It's time for change. That's a good message. He got out of the starting block so late that I think he'll have a lot of trouble getting traction on that.
Everybody talked about public safety, and I think all of us who talk to anybody who lives in Cleveland know that's a big issue. That's even what the one published poll talked a lot about. Did you expect to have heard more and maybe more specific ideas about how to improve public safety? I mean, a lot of talk about let's put more cops on the street. That's a very specific, but then...
It's a specific, but it's very expensive. And if you're going to hire 400 more police officers, you've got to show where the money's coming from, because the city doesn't have it. I think part of the problem with public safety is it's on everybody's minds, it's on every voter's mind. It's hard. And so nobody has a clear program for how they're going to do that. So while you would like to hear those specifics, I don't think it's surprising we're not hearing them. I was a little bit surprised that Frank Jackson didn't talk a bit more about the program he rolled out in February, which will take some time. You're not going to see results yet, but there at least were some specifics unveiled then, but he didn't bring those up.
Would you have expected also to hear, we've certainly a lot of trees died, or electrons, whatever that we do now in cleveland.com and the rest of us about the water department, some of the management issues. Did you think would you have expected to have heard more from the candidates about some of those administrative issues? Yeah,
look, if you're running against Frank Jackson, who has 12 years, there's stuff you could roll out. The water department's a great example. For like 2 years, the customer service was a disaster, and they moved very slowly to fix it. The police department needing the consent decree. The one person that jumped on that was, again, Eric Brewer effectively communicating. I've been waiting throughout this campaign for somebody to mention Tamir Rice as a reason Frank Jackson should no longer be mayor. Eric Brewer finally did that today, and he mentioned some of the other high-profile police cases. But the candidates are not using the issues that have marked marked the past 12 years to try and attack Frank Jackson, and it is strange because there are things there.
Great. I'm sure we could talk about this right all the way till tomorrow, but we have to end it here. Thanks a lot, Chris.